Welcome back, everybody. Welcome back to the Canyon. Welcome back to another one of those where we stay right here and we have that collision of quick view and a bit of tech note, because what we're going to do is we're going to take this shock right here, the Toomod, and we're going to tear it apart. And I'm going to tell you a whole bunch of numbers, because what happens is elements of the quote-unquote industry, they keep making shocks, and most people don't get it right. They just don't get it right. Traxxas basically got it right all those many moons ago with the 26, 60, 61, and 62, the big bore shocks, which are just so good that there are numerous clones of them, and all of the clones of them are pretty good. And why is that? Well, A, they are a bladdered shock, not an emulsion shock. This equates to better performance, and they don't need to be bled to fill. And they also use a ubiquitous set of parts. Shafts, pistons, seals, springs, rod ends, everything are readily and commonly available. And we see more than one too many shocks appear on the market that share nothing in common with any other shock. And we are at a point in history now where we don't need to achieve a more proprietary status. Pick a bore, pick a piston length, pick a shock body length, and then just take parts off the shelf and put it together. We need more Toyota method and less Lamborghini method. So here is the Toomod. This shock is almost exactly 90 millimeters eye to eye. I would put it at like 91 and a half. Close enough. They might just not have threaded the rod end at the bottom in far enough, which is easy to fix, provided that they did the things that we hope they did, which is don't just fire up the machines and start making something. The spring is not wildly uncommon, but it is also, for the purposes of tiny torque cars that go slow, not standard. It is 65 by 14. And when we say 14, we mean the inner bore, the part that fits over the body and the part that fits onto the cup. 14 by 65 is not outside the realm of possibility, but 4.6 pounds per inch, which is what that spring is not usable. You need to be jumping high into the air or have a body made entirely out of steel. Typically, your total spring rate is going to be between 50 and 75% of the weight of the vehicle, typically, in RTR weight. So if your vehicle weighs 5 pounds or 2 kilos, for those out there, we're going to try to use nice even numbers. If you have 5 pounds of vehicle weight, you're going to have between 2.5 and 4 pounds of total spring weight, meaning, like, say, 4 1-pound per inch springs. Because in tiny cars that go slow, generally a large portion of our weight is unsprung, so the springs don't have to deal with it. There are several vehicles here in the fleet that run total spring weight that would seem impossible, yet when you set them down, the springs settle at a perfect height and the links are level and the body sits right, because we don't need 4.6. That would be 18.4 pounds of springs. You would have to have a vehicle weighing somewhere around 25 pounds. You don't need that. Many shocks don't come with usable springs. These are no exception. But we only need to know a couple of things, because these don't need to bother us. This is an Element gray band, pretty typical, 13 by 60, so we'll be pretty close. And because the body is 12.9 millimeters, a 13 millimeter spring, and the shock shafts, it should be pointed out, are correct. 3 by 47. That is very typical for a shock shaft in a 90 millimeter shock. So an element, you get a little zuzza because we are talking about a 13 millimeter spring on a 12.9 millimeter body. So, but they do indeed fit, right? And then, if we want to make it just a little bit better, because the standard cups and springs will fit from any number of RTR shock. Axial shocks are also 13 millimeter inner bore ID. Traxxas shocks are 13 millimeter ID. So we've already opened ourselves up to many spring options. And then you get yourself, this is a Deluxe Soft, 0.8 pound. This is a 10 millimeter spring. And now we got the little cup down at the bottom, and it's a little snug. It's a little snug. And then this is an Element cup, which are the easiest ones because they have a slot. And then look at that. You've just introduced yourself into even more springing options, because 10 millimeter ID springs are Deluxe, Element from the SE, Losi Mini T. So far, the Toomod is 100% passing the test, because you can run all three of those springs and cups on this shock. So we're already moving in the correct direction. As I mentioned, the shock shaft is a 3 millimeter shock shaft, which means replaceable with any number of shock shafts out there. The 3.5 millimeter is the one you do not want to see. If a shock mentions that it has a 3.5 millimeter shaft on it, basically don't buy that shock. The seals aren't going to be right. You're not just going to be able to get off-the-shelf seals. This is a 3 millimeter shaft, which means it's threaded M3 down at the bottom. So any M3 rod end you have is just going to thread right onto the bottom. They do indeed use a 5.8 millimeter hollow ball. And when we say 5.8 millimeter, we mean across. So every hollow ball has three measurements, but we don't talk about the third one. We don't talk about the fact that it is by 3. The hole is a 3 millimeter hole in it. This hollow ball is 5.8 millimeters across, which is not going to be the same as your axial Traxxas element. They're all 5.7. If you put a 5.7 millimeter hollow ball in there, it's going to rattle around. But if you've bought virtually anything off of Amazon, Mias, RC Lions, on and on, they love themselves a 5.8 millimeter ball. It is a 5.8 by 5.5 at the bottom, which is very thin. And then it is a 5.8 by 7.5 at the top, which is super common. Element loves 7.5s. A lot of Axial love 7.5s. Traxxas loves 7s, 5.7 by 7. These are 5.8 by 7.5, 5.8 by 5.5. It's not a problem. You will be able to get, if you've ever bought Mias rod ends, like the end of this drawer is just nothing but that right there. That's a 5.8 by 7 hollow ball. So you can swap the hollow balls out. They didn't go, they're not 6 millimeter, they're not some random. They used an off-the-shelf thing, and for that we're thankful. It is the everything old is new again style, where the cap is 2 pieces. There's the metal outer part that actually threads onto the outside of the body, and then the cap is plastic. Do we not like metal caps? We don't like metal caps too much, because what if we need to change that ball? What if we need a thicker ball up there with a standoff or something? And, perhaps most importantly still, there is a bladder. Not only is it a bladder, it's an actual bladder. Many shocks that are intended to be bladdered, non-emulsion, do not come with bladders. They come with like a flat piece of silicone. That's a bladder. More importantly, this right here on my finger, that is a Traxxas bladder from the 2362 shock rebuild kit. And I want you to look at this. Wait. We need to do that. You put that in like that, and then we'll go like this, and we'll vacuum that right down. Look at that. That is one of the most near perfect fitments. Somebody did some math. Like, they used a part. They just went off the shelf. That bladder is an exceptionally good approximation of a Traxxas bladder. We'll fire this guy out. I have drained this shock. This shock is already drained. And I would like to point out that this shock is a 10.2 millimeter inner bore, and that is a 9.8 millimeter piston. Now, that is a bit of a gap, but let me grab one out of the bag, because there are 4. Now take into account, this is a 4.6 pound per inch spring. Look at that decel. What are we looking at? We're looking at a shock that out of the $25 Amazon bag, we're looking at a shock that not only damps, like with that amount of gap, 0.4 millimeters, almost half a millimeter of rattle space between the piston and the body, it's still damped. Because we're talking a 2-hole piston, and the piston hole is not remarkably large. I'm going to say 1 millimeter holes. That is a 0.98, so roughly a 1 millimeter hole, which means these will be perfectly suited to our good friend 300 CST, and it is 27.5 weight, give or take. And I would like to point out that if we can do a little meniscus action right here, see a little right there, you know what that is? Ladies and gentlemen, that is silicone oil. These shocks come filled with silicone oil, and the weight of it, so watch it run down the side right there. That's a little heavier than 300 CST. I would say it's around 400 weight. The biggest complaint I could make about this shock is that based on the size of the holes in the piston, they ship with oil that's a little bit too heavy. Crazy. Very close to the weight that would be needed to accommodate that 4.6 pound per inch spring. But like, I'm never going to knock a spring down a point. I'm never going to knock a shock down a point for being over damped. We have a nice metal preload adjuster. It moves very easily. Also has an O-ring, so you don't, I guess, mash it into the cap. It moves very easily. One of the seals came up inside of here. We're looking at the normal, basically par for the course. That is a little silicone ring. We have a molded plastic outer that has the nose on it, so it fills out the inside of the cap. And then we have one HDPE or PP spacer, and then we have one more of these. And that seal, spacer, seal, outer seal, that's called a seal pack. The recess for the seal pack is 6.5 millimeters across and 4.5 millimeters deep. By gum, by golly, that's a proper seal pocket that will fit 2 seals and a spacer. And when I say it will fit 2 seals and a spacer, I mean I can go over here to where the other bits of the 2362 are. Here is a Traxxas X-ring, and you'll watch that X-ring just drop right into the hole. They might have done it. They might have done it. These are 25, I want to say $25.88. It was a weird number. $25 for a set. And basically, the only thing that need be discarded are the springs and cups, because the 4.6 pound spring is ridiculous. But when we're building up a chav, which looks like this, an Amazon ChavTech, which is basically a clone of a Deluxe, which is a modification of a Traxxas Big Bore, bladdered, designed to fit 10 millimeter springs. It all goes together. These are incredibly trouble-free. These ran on a vehicle for almost 2 full years, and we're never, and as you can tell, there is 2 full years of use. There's an E-clip down in there. These have never been refilled. They've never been serviced in any way. They've started to develop the wear pattern on the outside of the shock shafts because these saw absolute use. These are unquestionably an option now, because remember when I said 0.4 millimeter? We can get just that little bit. If we get in much farther, it wiggles a little bit more. We can wiggle that. There it is. 0.4 millimeter. That amount of wiggle is what equates to, is what makes a shock start leaking, right? Because if the shaft can get out of alignment with the straightness of the bore, because that piston can walk around, what will happen is it will press to one side, and then oil can flow down that because it's trying to make the seals oval. But because the seal pack is in nice and tight, it's not much. It's just a little bit. So as a matter of fact, when you go to put them back together, a Q-tip or other, we can just use one of these. You put it like that because the easiest way to put this back together, because the seal pack is as tight as it is to slide the seals down this way, and then we'll put and everything's oily because this came oiled. It came full of silicone oil. That threads on nicely. Also, doing it this way, you'll never have any risk of the threads on the shock shaft ripping the seals. That genuinely feels nice. That is a seal pack under tension. And the reason that shocks from places like Axial tend to leak all over the place is they do not put a seal pack under tension. We're going to go to halfway. We're going to fill it to the top. We're going to pull it. And that's going to make a big bubble pop. I see a couple more little bubbles. This is 300 CST, so we'll see if I'm right. We're going to fill it up to just below the level right there. Could maybe go a little higher, but that's probably just about right. We're going to give ourselves one extra papelle. We're going to push up about that far, grab the bladder that came with the shock. We're going to set it down on top of that Earl. We're going to press this down like this, and then we're going to pull this down. And that is, so the inside of that bladder is now pulled down because that is the air that this shock is going to use to move. Then we're going to thread this down. Get it nice and snug down there. Looks pretty good. Barely squished any oil out, honestly. Tighten this collar back up. Let's see how this feels on 300 CST. It feels great. It feels great. If anything, again, a little slow, a little on the slow side. And I have said many times, and I will say many times again into the future, a little bit overdamped, a lot of bit overdamped is better than a little bit underdamped, because the underdamp will let your suspension release too quickly, right? You can, because we're not going into the air, because we don't spend any time in the air, we can easily run much heavier oil than we would in other circumstances. Look how slow that is. And that's on 300 CST with no piston change. If we got a set of Traxxas of TRA 2669s, and which is the piston set for big bores, and we put the 2-hole pistons in there, which are 10.0 millimeters, into that 10-millimeter bore, and those also have 1 millimeter holes. If we were to put those in there, you would have to run like something very light, like in the 20s. I would recommend at that point, if you want to get deep into shock tuning, I wholeheartedly support that decision. Shock tuning, for our purposes, is the way to go. Shock tuning on things that go in the air and go particularly fast. Right up above here out of frame is an acrylic rack that I made, and it's full of shock oil. And it starts from the left and it goes to the right, and it goes 10, 15, 20, 22 and a half, 25, 27 and a half, 30, 32 and a half. All those incremental weights, all the way up until we get to 80. So there's 30 bottles of shock oil. Luckily, if you grab yourself a piston drill set, you can buy yourself 1 bottle of oil. This one. TLR 40 weight purple, and just drill your pistons out to accommodate. You wouldn't have to, I don't think you really need to change anything on this shock except the spring and the cup to fit the spring that you want to run. I think by George, I think Toomod, coming in out of nowhere, has kind of done it. Like, I would still, okay, you're going to ask me that question. Would you buy, let me organize a little better. Would you buy this before you bought this? Presuming that they're the same length. These are 110s. Let's pretend that they're the same length. Would you buy this before you bought this? They're going to come out a little more expensive on this side. This side has a spring and a cup that are functional. They use 5.7 millimeter balls. That's a bonus. Their seal pack is not done as well because for whatever reason they stopped using E-clips or circlips and they started using a thread in, which is not great. But, I mean, for cleanliness of look, I go here. For runnability out of the package, you can honestly buy that bag of Toomod, change the springs and cups. You can probably, do you have an axial vehicle? Does it run a shock around the 90 millimeter area? Say you've got some 95s or 100s on your axial that has those nice soft axial 13x70 springs. I would say the yellow band would be a little heavy. You could take your springs and cups and just put them right on here and probably just slap it on the vehicle. You will have that issue of the 5.8 ball. So these are those little things. Whenever you begin to combine aftermarket with aftermarket, problems will arise because a lot of times the parts weren't designed to work with the other parts. So I've done the disassembly on a number of shocks, and for something out of the package, for something that costs what, $6.50 a shock, the seals work, the shafts are correct, the bodies go together properly, the seals are replaceable with off-the-shelf seals, they are bladdered, and the bladder is functional. The only misses are they came with a factory spring, too hard for anything. They could have gone, I mean, the temptation would be to just take these to a lathe and just machine off some of the threads. I think these can do well. I really think they can. I still see there's that. I don't know. Maybe I'm too much of a traditionalist. Maybe I'm just comfortable with the things that works. But the combination of GTS from the Traxxas TRX4, actual big bores, TRA 2660s from Traxxas, and these constitute over 90% of the shocks in the fleet. We're only running a couple of other different sets because what do you go with? You go with what works. But it's $26 and all you need to change your springs and cups and you can just run them. They're sufficiently damped. I would say softly Canyon certified. Now, we will have to build all 4 of these. We will have to, and by build, I mean find springs and cups to fit them, and a vehicle that needs to run them. And then we'll put them into service because that is the long-term test. And when we say long-term test, we mean long-term test. Because do you remember that gold one that was out here? In service for 2 years. So determining the viability of a shock in the long term, around here, when we say long term, we mean long term. I don't consider shocks to be consumable items. They're something that you buy because you need the adjustability, the tunability, the fitment, and the ability to not leak their guts out. And this has at least exhibited through cursory examination to fit a number of those things. It's not perfect. We've yet to meet a perfect shock. Even the big bore requires channel lock 926s to put them together. I would say that a little threaded on bottom is a step in the correct direction. But the Toomod, which comes with, where's the bag? In the bag, 4 shocks, some stickers, 4 replacement lower ends, which are the exact same size, and inexplicably 7 M3x14 screws. I just wanted to throw some screws in there, I guess. Would I say Canyon recommended? I can't say Canyon recommended yet because we don't know. We might run them for a couple days and they have their juices on the outside. But we know Traxxas pistons will fit. We know Traxxas seals will fit. We know Traxxas shock shafts will fit. So, at least for right now, softly recommended. Not full tested, but we've done the forensic and I do believe they passed. I believe y'all passed as well. Thank you so much for joining us. I look forward to any questions, comments, or concerns being listed in the comments section below. I look forward to seeing you in the next one. And in between now and then, please one and all do your very best. Have a good one, everybody. We'll see you again here from the canyon with some other thing. Hopefully, real soon.